Virtue ethics is the third moral theory given to you by Desjardins in his Introduction to Business Ethics. Historically, it is the preferred moral theory by the majority of Christians. Certainly, it is the preferred moral theory, historically speaking, of the Roman Catholic Church. And the reason for that is, unlike utilitarianism and unlike deontology, virtue ethics, from the word go, is very much open to God, to revealing moral principles from God to us. Not that deontology can't do that, but the Christian who is a Kantian has to add revelation to a theory that is not immediately predisposed to it. So virtue ethics is most open to God. It is also perhaps the best in terms of dealing with human nature, the best in terms of dealing with human character and human society. And here's why. What is a virtue? Well, a virtue, or virtues, these moral principles, are discovered by reason, acquired by practice, in a community of character. We first learn about morality, about what is good and what is bad, what is good and what is evil, within a community of character. Our family, our friends, assuming that our friends are of good character, assuming that our family is not dysfunctional, our society, again, assuming that they're not dysfunctional, and certainly groups that make up society, your hobby club, your reading club, the Boy Scouts, again, assuming that they are communities of character. Certainly, a community of character is the church, because even though the church may have stumbled either in a universal level or on a local level, generally speaking, the majority of the church, the majority of the time in its history, has remained true to the mission that God gave it. And integral to that mission is being a community of character. So the church historically has been a most reliable means of teaching us those moral principles that we live by. So within a community of character, we learn these moral principles. But being taught, being handed on these moral principles, that is not enough. We have to reason through why certain acts are wrong and certain acts are good. We have to reason why it is wrong to murder. We have to understand for ourselves why it is wrong to steal, wrong to lie. Things like that. But even that's not enough. It is also important to practice these things. It is one thing to understand a moral principle in the abstract, but to fully understand it, we have to practice. We have to work through it. Virtue ethics is a lot like attaining a craft. For example, cooking. If you're handed a recipe by someone, well, someone whom you trust has given you a means on how to, say, bake a cake. But the recipe is not enough. You have to reason through how to bake that cake. You have to read the recipe, you have to understand it, look for the ingredients, look for the tools, assemble them, but even that's not enough. Now you have to bake the cake, and that comes through practice. Perhaps the first go-around, the cake doesn't quite work out because you did not do a very good job of measuring and assembling the ingredients or preparing them. Maybe you had the wrong tools. Maybe you had the right tools, but they were poor. Basically, over time, through practice, you master this craft of baking a cake. And the same thing can go to painting a wall, to fixing a car, to fixing a technological product like the camera that's filming me now. It's not enough to simply know something. You have to practice, work at it, and attain the skill so that you can do these tasks such as baking a cake or fixing a car, planting a garden, those things well. And virtue ethics is quite similar. You are given a moral principle. You're given the reasoning behind that moral principle. But it is in the practice of that moral principle that you really and truly understand the wisdom, why it is right to do certain things and wrong to do other things, why it's right to not murder, why it is good to not steal or lie. And at the end of the day, You know this because you're flourishing, and the people around you are flourishing. You have the right motives for acting morally. You flourish, others flourish. You pursue the right means toward achieving that good end. You're flourishing, others are flourishing. And then you have the good end. And what you have is the good life. The good life wherein happiness is achieved. Not happiness as in ha ha he that tickles, but that deep down satisfaction that you are living a life that is good, where you and others around you are flourishing. And how do you know that these moral principles are indeed good? How do you avoid the trap of relativism? Well, for Catholics, we have the natural law, those moral principles that we consistently arrive at over and over and over again, no matter which epoch we live in or where we live. So, assuming that we're reasoning correctly, we always arrive at the conclusion that it's wrong to murder, that it is right to help other people live well, that it is wrong to steal, that it is wrong to lie, that it is right to do acts that help the other flourish as well as ourselves. And how do we know, unlike, say, a Kantian, that these principles are indeed eternal principles? Well, therein lies the importance of revelation. We have the Ten Commandments, we have the Beatitudes, we have the Holy Spirit, we have those confirmations from revelation that our moral reasoning is indeed correct and moving in the right direction. That's why a Catholic would say that the natural law is our participation in the divine law, our way of linking our reason to the mind of God, wherein what we reason out is confirmed by revelation. So we have these virtues, these moral principles, which have a most reliable foundation because we know that they are rooted in the eternal foundation that is God. This is important because can an atheist, can a non-Christian be virtuous? Of course. They can reason out these moral truths. The difference is this: their foundation is not as reliable as the foundation of a Christian because they do not have that means through natural law, through this form of reasoning, through revelation, to get at a surely reliable foundation of morality. Okay, so having established virtue ethics, where does it come from? Well, originally it comes from the pagan Greeks. Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, delivers a wonderful exposition of virtue ethics. He didn't invent it, he received it, but he does one of the best jobs in articulating it fully. Lactantius is a 3rd and 4th century, lived on the turn of that century, Christian, a church father. And in his institutes, he enables Christians to take virtue ethics up for themselves. The early church had doubts about virtue ethics because they thought that because it was pagan in origin that there was a problem with it. But Lactantius said no. As long as you understand that virtue ethics come from the one true God and not the gods, the false gods of the pagan, then you're fine. So with Lactantius, we can say that all virtues are rooted in the one true God. And we arrive at them through revelation and through reason. Now, virtue ethics are based on 4 cardinal virtues. They're the chief virtues from which all other virtues flow from. So, prudence. Prudence is the ability to judge well, the ability to take those eternal moral principles and apply them to specific situations. So, our moral principles remain eternal. How we apply them can change from time to time and from place to place. So how do we make the best application of these eternal moral truths? It is by the ability to judge well, and that comes through practice. For Christians, prudence is the chief cardinal virtue, because if you can't reason well, then the rest of these you can't do well. Justice is the ability to give others their due. That's a big task. How do you know what someone is due? That's a big question which we will be answering throughout the semester. Fortitude, also known as courage, and courage, by the way, comes from the French courage, strength of heart. Aristotle called fortitude or courage the primary virtue. He also called it the rarest virtue. Now, a Christian would not agree with Aristotle that this is the primary virtue. Thinking well is most important. But a Christian perhaps may agree with Aristotle that courage is the rarest virtue. It's very easy to not exercise fortitude. Fortitude is the virtue whereby we are virtuous, we are moral, no matter the opposition, no matter how much one suffers, no matter the trials and tribulations of life. And that can be a very rare virtue indeed, especially in the business world. It's very easy to slink away and not exercise virtuous behavior. But it takes the help of a community of character to give you fortitude. It takes the help of God and the Holy Spirit to give you fortitude, to exercise that courage, to always be moral, no matter what. Temperance is a misunderstood virtue. It does not mean abstinence. It does not mean moderation alone. It can include that. But temperance is best understood as exercising things in proper portion and in proper order. So sometimes it's all right to feast. It's temperate to feast. Other times it is temperate to fast, to abstain. We'll talk about that as the semester progresses. One critique of virtue ethics. What about extreme cases? So let's say I am a Coast Guard helicopter pilot and there are two people stuck in a tree and I only have time to rescue one because the water is rising. Who do I rescue? Critics of virtue ethics would say that we cannot handle moral dilemmas like that. We can. Basically, virtue ethics says, if you master through practice, if you master within a community of character, the ability to reason well, to handle day-to-day moral questions, then you'll have the ability to deal with those extreme cases. Not that you'll wind up on the other end of those extreme cases happy, but at least you'll wind up with a clear conscience, with your head held high, knowing that you made the best, most prudential, most virtuous, most Christian decision possible.